just want to welcome you to this evening, our first live Q&A for the happenings. I want to quickly note a few moments of housekeeping. So if at any point we're going to have a quick, just in the next few minutes, we're going to have a quick discussion with me, Natasha and Dael. And if you have any questions while people are talking for anybody in particular or for the group in general, please put into the Q&A function and we'll be watching out for that and we'll ask them all at the end all together. And if you are in need of closed captioning or any subtitling, there's subtitling available. So if you click on your three little dots that says more, you can either show or hide your subtitling. So feel free to use that if you need. Thank you all for being here. We're really excited to have three amazing artistic, creative geniuses, in my particular opinion. Sumbwanyambe, who is a writer and an academic, and he is currently a lecturer within Northumbria University, but also has written many award-winning plays and a fantastic young man from Edinburgh. We've got Natasha Ruwona, who is an artist, a creative and a curator, and Natasha uses Afrofuturism for storytelling through poetic landscapes. And then we've got Dael Orlandersmith, who is from New York and who's actually joining us from New York at this moment in time, who's also a very much award-winning playwright and performer, whose work Until the Flood is actually available on the Travis's website at the moment. So if you haven't watched that, please go across and watch that. And we're just going to jump right in. Debbie, our lovely host, is going to just ask a few questions. And if there's any questions that you come into your mind while we're talking, please put it into the chat function and ask questions.
Amazing. Hello everyone, I'm Debbie. I'm the co-artistic director designate of the Traverse Theatre. I'm absolutely buzzing to be speaking to particularly these three artists tonight, so excuse me if I get too excited because it's going to happen. I've got a whole set of questions for each artist. I'm going to dive in and we're going to speak to Natasha first. Hello, Natasha's a beautiful bit of video art, I would call it, although that's maybe even narrowing down what it is too much because it does so many things. In Dream's Eye, you can see on the Traverse website as well. I thought it was absolutely stunning, Natasha. It's really, I'm an Edinburgh girl as well. That map, the map that shows up in it, I feel like I know that map like that is the back of my hand. So the layers in it were just stunning to me. My first question is actually about maps, so clearly I got really into that. That image kept coming back again and again in the Google map that we all know, and I was wondering how you feel that place, specifically geography, shows up in your work. Is that a constant theme or is that something specific to this?
Yeah, I think so. This film is the first work in I guess this long project on Black geographies that I've been doing. So that was the first work that I made in response to, I guess, the research and the ideas that I had for that. And then moving kind of on from that, I've taken more of an interest in Black geographies and thinking about space and how that is relevant to how we move around the world and through that the day-to-day or through travel or whatever. So it was kind of the first film that started that kind of research and documented that research, but also had creative responses to it as well.
And how would you describe, if someone's never met the phrase Black geographies before, totally new to that phrase, how would you describe what that is and how you look at the world through that?
Yeah, so I guess my own description of that would be so it's taken from Black feminist geographies and looking at migration, I guess movement and travel, and whether forced migration or forced travel or chosen, and what that might mean as well with the intricate layers of that. And then also I guess just being in a space and how that has mental effects on you, physical effects on you, the differences between having to exist in different spaces, but also the relationship between the land and the natural environment as well, as opposed to the built environment in the city. And I think that hopefully that work that was touching on that a little bit in terms of our first seat is a space and a place to exist as a Black person, but also these like imaginative like histories and stories, and reimagining as a kind of site of Black resistance.
Yeah, I mean, that's so clear. I was gonna, the next question you sort of started to answer, so I'll go on to it, which is, how does Scottishness
Mm.
meet Afrofuturism in your work? Because you
Mm.
combine the two into an even like a potent thing in that particular artwork. So I was wondering where you find the intersection of them.
Yeah, I think like for me a big thing is thinking about like Scottish, or like being Black in Scotland, or being like Black and Scottish as a myth. And like for
Mm.
that I've been thinking like about Scottish mythologies but also African mythologies. And then but also thinking about what it means to like exist as a myth in like this time, in this now, in this place. Because like I don't know, I feel like people always ask, um oh, like you're like Black and Scottish, or like what's it like? And I think it's still something that's quite like not unheard of, but
Mm.
it's still quite like a it's yeah, it's, I mean, I guess it's different from being like Black and British. So it's been this thing that I've been thinking about for a little while. So through that I've been kind of playing with ideas of like myth and how they can be incorporated. um and I guess, yeah, thinking about like Scottish Black history and places, and playing on those as like a theme of Afrofuturism. So imagining different Scottish histories or Scottish futures, and using the landscape within it, like quite well-known landscapes as well. So I think that, so it can be like quite recognizable, as that's usually seen as like a kind of like particular like white Scottish thing to be outside and to be in nature and things like that, than to have it kind of flipped and have Black people in those spaces. Because I've never really seen photos of like Black people in Scottish landscapes before, or like portraits or anything.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in the smallest way, and I mean massively due to Wesley's work with the mural as well, that Scotland's just started to have its the type like a pixel-sized conversation about
Mm.
you know, the street names I was thinking about,
Yeah.
and only now, and which you reference in the work with Frederick Douglass, and like how there's so much history written into the
Mm.
Scottish landscape that actually hasn't really been picked at. um,
Mm.
and I feel like you've like really stunningly just like tore a wee bit at the thread of like the Scottish relationship to empire, and how much it's not
Mm.
it's an undealt with thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of work I feel like still to be done, and especially like kind of combining that, the historical aspect or like the research within that, but also I feel like there's a lot of space within like the arts as well to like have these conversations and have more works that like refer back to this history, or refer back to like the present experiences, and also like, yeah, speculating on like the future as well, like what that could be like.
What would that if you'd send that provocation to the arts could be this space that holds that,
Mm.
what would that look like for you, like in a hopeful way? What would you want to see more of in Scotland in 5 years time? That's a horrible job interview question, but I'm genuinely looking
Yeah,
forward.
I feel like, yeah, it's an important question I think to think of, and I think it reframes like my work as well, and like how what I'm trying to do maybe, like, or think about like what the goal is, or the conversations that need to be had, and also the actions that follow them. But I definitely think like more opportunities for the arts, and for people of color and for Black people to get involved, more initiatives, more Black led and like POC led initiatives that have money, that have funding, but also more like sustainable jobs as well. Like I guess it's often the starts at like the ground up to make change, but actually it starts off at the hierarchs. And I think that there needs to be more people from yeah, Black and POC communities in those positions, and have permanent positions, and I think that can help infiltrate change. But I do think, yeah, it's interesting to think about the sustainability, because it's interesting, yeah, just the kind of structures within it, and the power structures also, and then trying to kind of like dismantle or like create discussion about that, but from like an artistic point of view without much power in those institutions. It's an interesting relationship.
Yeah, I hear that. That's like power at the top, and like
Mm.
leadership, isn't it? Versus,
Yeah.
not versus, because that's so oppositional, but
Mm.
also kind of versus the like
Yeah, yeah,
the artist doing the dismantling. Um,
exactly.
and you need all of it in the ecology to change, I think.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just
definitely.
repeating you really, but yeah,
Yeah.
I hear that. I also found the other element of your work is that it did combine landscape, but it also went really into digital identities as
Mm.
well. Um,
Mm.
and I'd love to hear like what that, you know, how God, our digital identity now
Yeah.
You know, like it's a blurry line between what our actual identity is. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more on your thoughts on digital identity in that, particularly in that piece.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, I think my thoughts on it were like accessing spaces, and this was like made like pre-COVID, but it also kind of, I guess, like refers back as well, because just, yeah, thinking about like access to spaces, and thinking about being in Scotland and not having access to like, I don't know, the motherland, and thinking about these different things and how you can just go on Google Maps and just like be in that space. And I think that was something I began working on, is like, oh, like these kind of like journeys of looking at things, yeah, from Google Maps, and how that kind of feels like you're there. But yeah, with that, I was looking at like representing like both of the Jamaicas and doing it in a way that kind of just like sprung back and forth with them. And yeah, the digital as well, I guess it relates into Afrofuturism and like ideas of like post-humanism, and like thinking about how I exist in the world, and also just like the tiredness that comes with that. So like moving things digitally often feels a bit easier, because then it's existing in like a kind of more like malleable world, or a world that is more dictated by like what I want, if that makes sense. So yeah, just being able to like have that kind of like voice and like authority by creating your own worlds and to exist in. Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's like incredibly inspiring, in the sense that it takes you away from a really like basic negative, you know, anti-capitalist reading of digital as like an evil, like consumerist space. Actually, it's this malleable like space of agency.
Yeah.
Which I'm now like, yes, like get us online more, which is not something I thought I'd say after this year. But yeah, that's so exciting. Yeah, so poignant, that piece of work, and the 2 Arthur seats. And yeah, I really, anyone who's not caught Natasha's work, I really advocate for you to go there and watch it. And especially if you have spent any time in Edinburgh, it's going to land on you in a certain way. Thank you so much, Natasha. I'm from over to another Edinburgh boy. May, your piece, The Stories We Tell About Black Lives Matter. I wondered, kicking off, you are, as Wesley said, a very recognised playwright and academic, and I wondered what it was like to speak your words rather than have other people speak them for you.
You know, I didn't really approach it as a performance. You know, I should say, you know, my background before I was a playwright was law, and you know, I've been a teacher for almost as long as I've been a playwright, I guess. So there's always been a part of my day-to-day life that is kind of end on trying to talk about issues that I'm passionate about, and issues that have sort of raised lots of questions that, you know, I haven't necessarily been able to find simple answers to. I think there's something about writing plays that is very much about internal introspection. At least the best kind of political plays are, in my opinion. They ask questions about your own humanity and your own the role that you play in your community and the society that you live in, and hopefully through those answers you kind of you stumble across nuggets of gold that other people find useful. So, you know, in that sense, I don't think there is a huge gap between what I think of what brilliant playwriting is and what I think about, you know, giving a lecture is, or you know, trying to talk, you know, expansively on a complicated subject.
Yeah, the both are connecting to your audience, right? Even if the form.
Yeah. As in, like, literally, my background was human rights law, immigration law, and you know, I certainly don't use it in my day-to-day job anymore. But I do think that you can see a through line through everything that I've written, which is really about, you know, the almost the philosophical side of law, the jurisprudential side of law, what's right and what's wrong, what's legal, what's unlawful, and all those many grey areas in between. You know, sometimes, you know, you know, I know one of the questions you want to ask me is about my reaction to the lacking of Scotland, and you know, the interesting thing for me is I still have no problem celebrating the extraordinary artistic performance and achievement of Forrest Whitaker. But at the same time, I can still feel proud for that Black man, but also feel absolute despair about the dramaturgy that's underpinning that storytelling, and how it essentially disenfranchises and removes the voice from from Black people in their own country in what should be their own story, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, like, as someone who knows your work as it's been on and has read it as well, that makes so much sense to me that you used to be in law, because you look at where the lines are that we've been handed in structures, and you look at the human bits in between, I think.
Yeah.
And it yeah, it really feels like that. Yeah.
It's funny, like, you know, I was just listening to Natasha right now, and that thing about the myth of the Black Scot. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing, you know. I'm a Zambian as well, you know, and it's like, you know, the Black Scot, that doesn't sound very Scottish, who sort of moved to England at, you know, 4 or 5, and so has this, you know, Yorkshire thing going on. It's an extraordinary thing. I remember the first play that, you know, I wrote that was significant. Obviously, it wasn't the first play I wrote. I written many plays before that, after independence. It was commissioned by the BBC, and I was living in London at the time, and there was obviously the Scottish independence referendum. And the terms of that debate at the time was, even if you identified as Scottish, or even if you felt like this was your home, if you didn't have a Scottish postcode at that time, you weren't allowed to vote, which was a tricky thing for me, because, you know, Black British, and certainly not British in the imperial sense of the terms, but Black British always meant something to me. You know, being born in Scotland, being raised in England, not feeling Scottish, certainly not feeling English. And I found myself sort of sitting there going, actually, if Scotland voted for its independence, whatever I think of as my identity overnight would be ripped in two. And I sort of said to the BBC at the time, you know, I really want to write about home. You know, I really want to write about Africa, but I want to tie in all those parts of my personality, you know, all those parts of my identity. And I said to them, you know, who is the mirror or the opposite of me in Africa? And the obvious answer was white Zimbabweans and white South Africans. But for them, the stakes were huge. You know, they were essentially having their identity ripped up overnight because of a vote that they felt powerless in. But, you know, they could look at that country and be like, I've lived here for 5-6 years. My children, grandchildren, etc., were born here. And yet they were being told that refrain, go back to where you come from, you know? The question then becomes, where do these people come from? You know, to be an African, does that mean to be Black? You know, in the same way that I think, you know, some of the beautiful things that Natasha was saying right now is there is a really weird, toxic, nationalistic ideology here that does still exist. It's still prevalent. We saw it in the Brexit referendum, where people think, unfortunately, that to be from this country is to be white, you know? And anything we can do to challenge that, you know, for sure, I think that's my fight, that's my battle.
And are you seeing that being challenged? Like, do you feel, and I guess I do, I mean British, but also specifically to Scotland, do you think, are things shifting? Are people coming through that you're excited about, or are getting airtime, or do you feel like we've not?
In the university system, certainly, I think that there's a lot of really powerful young voices that it's a huge privilege to work with. You know, whether or not this industry is ready to transition those young children from the university systems and to give them opportunities, professional opportunities on the stage, I think is a bigger question that is, you know, possibly, you know, way above my pay grade. And in terms of my own efforts, again, for me, I should have had a play on tour at the moment with the National Theatre of Scotland that's about Joseph Knight. I know that, you know, just as of yesterday, we're having conversations about trying to do that next year. And it's like, you know, for me, that really did grow out of a response to, you know, this idea that, you know, Black people have only been part of the history of this country for a very short period of time. You know, this sense of people saying we want our country back, and that being built on this myth, again, to use Natasha's language, that, you know, the Windrush happened, and then post-World War II, all of a sudden Black people were here, and it denies the truth that, you know, Black people and white people have been living side by side in this country for many years, and we have made incredible contributions to the development of this society, culturally, economically, socially, politically, etc. But like, the thing that really, you know, I've only watched Dael's once. I watched it for the first time a few days ago, but I have had the opportunity to watch Natasha's a few times. And And the reference in a Frederick Douglass kind of touched a note with me, because the next play I'm writing is about Frederick Douglass. And actually what I found really fascinating about, you know, challenging that dangerous myth with what you had in Frederick Douglass is somebody who comes along maybe 60, 70 years, 50 years maybe, I don't know, after Joseph Knight has had, you know, been involved with this landmark case ruling. And I mean, maybe Dael can speak to this actually, because you know, I don't want to get American history wrong. You know, we're talking about a time when the Bowery Theatre in New York is exporting the original minstrelsy shows to the UK, and it's having this devastating impact. It's changing things. So from Joseph Knight, where a black man and a white woman can marry, and there's such a supremacy of the church that the community would never challenge the church. If the church baptized a young black man, that's not to say there wasn't racism in this country, but if the church baptized a black man, he would be accepted. If the church married a young white man and a young black woman, the community wouldn't challenge that. Now, at the same time, I believe in American history, you've got this situation where for a black man to look at a white woman too long, they would lynch him, you know? And it's like, for me, Frederick Douglass comes into this country, and obviously I'm in that place right now where I have a huge resource of Frederick Douglass stuff, if you want that, Natasha. And I'm reading his speeches, and he's this extraordinarily eloquent person, and it jumps off the pages. And at the beginning of his time here, he's talking about never feeling more like a human being, never feeling like he'd been treated with more respect, with more dignity. By the end of the time here, he is talking about the infernal nuisance of these minstrelsy shows, because there's a certain kind of racism that's jumping into society, that's starting to infect the vernacular, and it's coming directly from this relationship between these people from the southern states of America, who, I believe when it was too hot, they spent their summers in New York, and those minstrelsy shows were a commercial venture to try and entertain those people. Mm-hmm. It's like, you know, it's interesting that you brought us three together, because I know Dael's work. You know, I've just met Dael for the first time, but it's like I've been a fan for so long, and I can kind of see all the dots joining between the three of us, that's a beautiful thing, you know.
Yeah, massively. And you've just joined the dots through like Scotland's relationship as well to like the arts, actually, and like the act of performance, and how it in itself is like historically and thus present day racialized, right? So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like you've sort of drawn that constellation there all the way from Douglas's like trip to, was it Dundee he went to, like was, you know,
he was everywhere. He was everywhere, for sure.
Yeah. And as you're saying, like the bits that get left to be told and the bits that are then removed from the tellings, right? And it's like, I think your piece may, and by changing how we look at the last King of Scotland is rewriting like actively how we look at that, and it sounds like it's the same with Frederick Douglass. You're gonna, you know, write that back in as such. Like...
Yeah. For me, I'm really inspired at the moment by a sort of American philosophical movement, and that it's called post-Black art. And that's the thing that's got me at the moment. So I'm really resistant to anything that tries to simplify what Blackness is. Blackness is a complicated term. It's the basis of my PhD. It really is. It's like I am writing historical plays and trying to sort of adhere to the rules of that genre, but at the same time, I'm trying to create characters that certainly rooted in Blackness, but aren't sort of defined by Blackness. You know, in that reductive way where it's like, you know, we've all seen those stories, you know, uneducated Black people caught in perpetual cycles of murder and rape and substance abuse and the destruction of their own communities. And it's like, for me, our communities aren't perfect. There are certainly elements of our communities that I would hope would improve, and but at the same time, when you take all of Blackness and you only try and portray it as one thing, I think that's the thing that's deeply dangerous, and that's why I think post-Black art is so important. You know, I want to see a lot of work that, you know, removes the burden of representing all of Black people. You know, and I think that's what happens in a lot of work on the stage, in prose, you know, in film. It's all of a sudden like, if it's a good character, this is how all Black people are. If it's a bad character, this is, and how all Black people are. But I think there's so many examples in everyday life now that challenge that really illustrate that there's so much diversity to whatever it means to be a Black person in this society. And that's the kind of work I want to see happening in the future and in the present, I guess.
I mean, that rings so loud from you and Natasha both saying your existence in itself is, you're a living myth, and it's like, you're like, yeah, I'm not allowing it to be as uncomplicated as a myth. It's as complicated as a reality, And that just like, yeah, that just ripples through all of your work, and particularly your happening that you've made. I think that neatly moves us on to Dael, because of the expanse across the water that you took us on there, May. Hello, Dael. Dael's piece, Until the Flood, is available on the Traverse website. As Wesi said, it's a startling piece. Dael inhabits multiple people as if they are right in front of me in 3D living. It is astounding, I have to say, as a geek about acting, it is. But it also speaks to such a large thing. It's you need to watch it. That's the only way you can articulate it. No one can neatly sum that up, I would say. And Dael's happening is speaking about that and reflecting back on it now. Absolute pleasure to have you. My first question to you, Dael, is about your internationalism, because this Until the Flood traveled all over the world, and you speak on how it was received everywhere from New York, where you are, to Galway, right? You took all the way to Galway. And I was wondering now, after this year of us being stuck where we are for quite a long time, how does your internationalism live now? Are you still thinking on that global scale, or has New York become the lens through which you're thinking?
I'm going to use here's one of your poet, Scottish, Robert Burns, Scottish, right?
Yeah.
It's a given that I'm Black. It's a given that I'm female, but I'm also a citizen of the world. That phrase came from him. And I want to, there's an expression we use in the States, piggyback. I want to piggyback on what May was saying in terms of, like, as Black folk, just to do that, we're multifaceted, we're multi-ethnic, we're multiracial. I want to see the kind of work that I can speak to and not speak for, because I'm coming now as an artist. Yeah, when I say this, my job is theater maker, beginning, middle, end, story, conflict, resolution. Mm-hmm. I'm not an issue-based person. I don't consider myself political in that regard. My saying is in my doing, in terms of what I have to say in the work, because first and foremost, I'm an artist and a theater maker. So when something becomes issue-based, and again, there are people who can do it very well. There are certain people who use it as a tool because they call themselves, I shouldn't say, and that sounds patronizing, they consider themselves political activists, and I think that's great. If I am an activist, mine is more so in what I have to say as in approaching the work. Because if the work becomes too issue-based, it becomes at the expense of theater. Mm. So this is where I'm coming from. So some people misinterpret it and they go, "Oh, you're not, you're not facing what's going on." Before I even open my mouth, when I walk into a room, I'm dealing with what's going on. So don't tell me what I can and cannot write, because when someone tells me that, they have now, black, white, green, or purple, have become the oppressor when they try to tell me what to write and what to say. So mine is more on the doing. And in terms of the international thing, I mean, we've all been here in the States, the deaths of, I can't even keep up with it, combined with pandemic, combined with all of it, it affects me. But in terms of it having more of an impact, it gets weird like that. And I don't know whether I answered your question. I think I did.
Yeah, you did. I'm about to misquote Toni Morrison, which is probably the most embarrassing thing a white person can do on this Zoom, but I'm going to do it, which is that what's her quote that's like, definitions are for the definers, not the defined? It's something like that.
No, you nailed it. That's it.
Thank God. Because I just felt that's what you were saying there of like,
she's actually one of my favorite writers. So yeah, I mean, I think she's brilliant. But yeah, that's what it is. I think if there's any, I want to write and I try to write about all kinds of things, all kinds of people. The expectation, and again, this is piggybacking on what May was saying, is to simply write about identity in that way. To write about, you know, well, and, you know, and hood rats and, you know, the downtrodden, you know, there are people of color who come to the theater and they want their kids to be there. They take their kids to museum. Not everybody has a crack pipe in their mouth. Not everybody is cranking out babies at 13 years of age. You know, I mean, I have characters that are white that I write about. I have characters that, well, and here, you know, in the States, you know, there's an expression we use, New Yorican, as in Puerto Ricans who are from New York. We call them New Yoricans, right? So culture-wise, I'm of Caribbean descent. My mother's from the South, and then also I grew up with a lot of Puerto Ricans, thus New Yoricans. So, you know, again, as someone using the citizen of the world thing, I write about all kinds of stuff. I've written, I mean, when I had a play that was read at the Druid where I wrote about an Irish family.
That's amazing.
No, it's human. That's what I mean. That's the whole thing that people find amazing. You know, because if I were a man and if I were white and I wrote that, no one would find it amazing.
Like, oh, well, you've probably got Irish heritage. You've permission to that.
Actually, I got a little, but that's not the point. You know what I mean? Because it's like,
actually, I do.
I wrote a play about Billie Holiday's first tour of Europe, and she was with she went her first place January 18th, 1954. She went to Copenhagen, and she was hanging with a Copenhagen. So I wrote the play both in Danish and in English.
Of course.
You know, but so, and it was written for a white character, and I had certain people within the Black community get mad at me for doing that.
There's so many like permissions that you.
This is what I mean.
To have to get like.
I mean, and see, we're in a time. I mean, and obviously, what happens, which is great, the systems are breaking down, but I think it is important that people don't let their anger get in the way of common sense, and that's going to happen because, you know, you're looking at the systemic racism on both ends on worldwide, and you're going to be emotional about that. But when you get to a point when you say, like, this is happening in the States, and I don't know whether this is happening there, where you say only a trans person can direct a trans play, only a Black person can direct a Black play, only this one can direct this, only that one can direct that, you have now become the oppressor. You've got the collective experience of race and gender and all of those things. But when you say only this one can do that one, only that one can do that, that means you're severing an individual voice. And now you are holding people back. You've now become the oppressor. Like someone here was trying to get rid of the film Gone with the Wind. I'm not crazy about Gone with the Wind. I've never seen so many happy slaves in my life. It's ridiculous, right? Now, having said that, if you get rid of that film, a lot of people are not going to know that Hattie McDaniel was the first Black woman that was nominated and received an Oscar. Not a lot of people are going to know how Black people were portrayed. D.W. Griffith, you know, Birth of a Nation. You know, all those things need to be seen. You know, it's because it creates ignorance.
Yeah, I
am anti-censorship. Are there people that, you know, here in the States that mess around with the First Amendment and use the political for socioeconomic means, you know, to put themselves ahead? Of course they do, but it also means it takes away from my right and May's right and Natasha's right, everybody's right on this.
And it's a world of like what you're talking about, and what I think me and Natasha touched on there was like, it's a world of ands. Like, it's not a world of silos and division, which is like what Victorian military way of thinking. It's a world of this and this and this and this and this, and all those complications can be together. And it's just our narrative.
Integration means retrogression. Retrogression means extinction. I mean, if one's going to say, for instance, Shakespeare obviously is a wonderful writer. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But I do think that there is something, you know, to say that a WASP patriarchy creates, you know, there's a word that I'm looking for. I mean, that this is the basis of all art.
Yeah.
Itself becomes racist, you know? I mean, because if you're going to be that myopic, you know, then he took from Christopher Marlowe. Christopher Marlowe took from Ben Jonson. Ben Jonson was influenced by Terence. Terence was a North African. So if you're going to think that linear that way, we're talking about lack of integration. If there was no Terrence, none of these cats would exist.
Yep.
You know,
that's the should be the opening gambit of every literature lesson, May, in every school. Are we on?
like, you know, like when people, everyone has a culture.
Yeah.
You know, has a culture. You know, so it's like when in 1923 is when U.B. Blake and Noble Sissel came with Josephine Baker to Paris in a show called Shuffle Along. The person that was there to meet them was Stravinsky. Stravinsky said, "Yours is the music I've been playing." 1946 in LA, Charlie Parker tried to meet Stravinsky and say, "Yours is the music I've been playing." When you read, say, someone like, if you're reading Eugene O'Neill studied Asian culture when he wrote The Hairy Ape. When August Wilson read the whole series of the last work that he did, he was a friend. I became friendly with August. You should hear him recite Fern Hill.
Oh my God! Wow.
Eugene O'Neill studied jazz when he wrote, All God's Children Got Wings, Emperor Jones. And in terms of, like I say, when August was writing King Hedley, he referred to Long Day's Journey into Night.
Yeah. And like that, the level of interconnection, the constellation that is, that's the thing that gets chopped up and divided. And of course you're saying that to me, like it made me really emotional as you were saying it, because I was like, of course, like that is, like humanity is that network, it is that.
It is. But we have to realize that also within what is humane is the fact that everyone should be working. That's where the inhumane comes in. And yes, there has to be more people of color. And yes, there has to be trans and LGBT. Everyone should be working. So, and it negates what art is about. It totally negates what art is about when we separate like this. And we also need to hear the stories. And the theater is the means to give people permission to be uncomfortable, because certainly you have work that's supposed to be, just for the sake of entertainment and mindless. And nothing is ever totally mindless. But it also, when we're supposed to be sitting in those seats and we're supposed to be like kind of moving around a little bit when something applies to us, the three fingers pointing back at you is imperative.
Yeah. We've been talking about in the Traverse, like why does culture matter and who is it for, which you've just taken us on a through time and space journey of touching on all of that, but which has like exploded my heart a bit. But I was wondering that question, why does it matter and who is it for, from an American context specifically, now in this time, especially of change ahead, what does that mean to you?
I think I kind of answered it. Like, when the course of a day, I might be listening to Nina Simone, I might be listening to Nina Hagen, I might be listening to Brian Jonestown Massacre, I might be listening to oh God, what was CeeLo's man again? Nars Barkley. I don't like a lot of solo stuff, but Nars Barkley. I might be listening right now. I'm listening to a lot of John Coltrane. I might be reading. I just finished reading Edna O'Brien. You know what I mean? So that's the way I function. Normally, that's the way I function. As the older I get, the more I listen. I learn to listen to my own, listen to my own self. Because I've been, I think a lot of us have. It's also because there's always going to be someone who gets angry with you, and you have to really, trust your own. It's like one of my favorite poets is Anne Sexton, right? Mm-hmm. And they asked her, they said, "Why do you write the way you write?" And she goes, "I have the right to invade my own privacy." That's one of the most brilliant things I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, May's writing that down.
Yeah.
Legit.
Yeah, listen, if ever there is a class, I'm signing up.
Yeah, that sounds like, I think sometimes maybe it's to do with the funding culture in the UK, or the way the government relates to how culture exists and how culture, capital C, exists. without acknowledging that version of it that you've just said, that actually is our lives, isn't it? Where they are the bricks around us that hold us.
We have the same thing in the States. I mean, for instance, which I find, again, and this is where it becomes systemic, and this is what because what racism also does, and all the isms, the sexisms, all of that, it creates a legacy where people take on the very bias that's been done onto them. And then they've been made to feel, in other words, it's like, okay, you have this expression in England, Ireland, and Scotland, so-and-so is trying to be posh if someone is trying to get beyond their means.
Yeah.
In other words, you've been made to feel, in order for you to live, to be truly Irish or Scottish or Black, Irish, Scottish, whatever it is, you have to be poor. You have to live in council flats. And for those of you who, who come out of that, you're trying to be something that you're not. Now, this segues into what's going on here in the States. There is a rift with certain Black American actors and performers. We don't need them over here, i.e. British, Scottish, Irish, actors of color. There's no, and they say, well, how come they're working over there? So how come those guys, Idris Elba and all of these guys are coming over here? I said, you want to know why they've come here? Because their own country didn't hire them because of systemic racism. I've been to the UK many times. You've got first generation kids young people from India, China, Africa, the Caribbean. Why isn't that work getting done? And when those actors do, in fact, come to the States, they take a major pay cut when they come here. Because people said, because again, when people deify it and they say, well, this WASP patriarchy where people are better trained, it has nothing to do with that. I mean, Gary Oldman is watching, Robert De Niro, so you can't say that. It has to do with systemic racism on both ends of the spectrum. So here, what gets done is the Southern sharecropper urban ghetto experience, right? There, when I go to the UK and when I go to other places, that's the expectation is to see that. And then the flip of it, what May is saying, what Natasha was saying is the only thing you see there is like poor African experience, poor Scottish / British experience. So it's the flip side of the same coin, opposed to seeing people that are ubiquitous, that are fully fledged, fully fleshed people. Like there's an actor that I want to write about. Now watch May take that from me. It's okay, honey, I'll let you do it. Who was in fact who was I think he was a British Shakespearean actor that ended up doing a lot of work in the
Eldridge.
Europe, and he's buried in Poland.
Ira Eldridge, what's his name?
He's buried in Poland.
I think it's him. Yeah.
I don't know where he's buried, but I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, you don't hear about that.
Yeah.
You don't hear about that kind of stuff.
I think you should write that for sure. I think you should write that. I wanted to pick up on something you said there, Del. I think that there's something. So I know you guys framed it in terms of internationalism, but something so universally true about, because I know you said it in your happening as well, about certain rules within societies that are sort of holding people down, and people within those communities feeling like they have to sort of play up to those stereotypes to be able to fit in. I think there's an extraordinary amount of that in all kinds of communities in this country that you kind of saw in Brexit, where people almost cling on to irrationally stupid things as a way of sort of fitting in with their tribe. It's like the thing that I found in like the small community that I grew up in was, a lot of people like, immigration is the problem. Immigration is the reason why I'm struggling. Immigration is the reason why this, and like if you speak to that person for long enough, I think you see something that is truly happening on both sides of the Atlantic. In the US, I think that it manifests in people who are just watching Fox News, who are getting all of their news from that central location. But I would argue that in this country, we get the same thing where people who are constantly getting their news from, like, say, the tabloids, like the Daily Mail or the Sun, end up having these very rigid ideas about how they should speak as a way to sort of fit in with their tribe. Now, I got invited to this this dinner, this really weird sort of online dinner, etc., with Twitter and all the like Twitter leadership the other day, And at one point we were talking about, you know, what I've seen a lot in terms of putting work out that's trying to sort of engage with Scotland's history. This thing that's happening where, you know, people are having these culture wars where they're trying to deny history, you know, any history that sort of makes them feel uncomfortable. And it was like split, because there's a lot of people who were like, oh, we just have to ban all those people. Twitter, what are you doing to ban all those people? And I was like, I don't know if I feel comfortable with that. It's kind of like what you're saying about that censorship. You know, I feel like it's so important to talk to those people, to educate those people, and actually just sort of banning them, it solves nothing. You know, it kind of just perpetuates the problem.
It solves nothing. I mean, it's, again, you know, what it does is create ignorance. And also, again, there is the legacy. You know, when I was a kid, you know, I'm a recovering Catholic, you know what I mean? I was raised Catholic. So I had to go to this Catholic school. I had to take a test with this girl. And what happened was, you know, we're sitting here and in this classroom, you know, it was just the three of us taking this test. And the teacher said to me, I was always told that, you know, you're always showing off. And it wasn't that I was showing off. What I was saying is like, yes, I come from this ghetto, but what you're teaching me, I want to learn. So as we're taking this test, this girl, Maria, she turned to me, she goes, show me your answers. And I said, I'm not going to show you my answers. I'm going to do this, you know, how come, you know? And then so what happened was, and this, it would happen to be true, teacher came up to Maria and said, well, how come you didn't do your homework? And she said, well, you know, my dad got drunk again and my brother was, you know, he was using dope and ... And then the teacher walked away, and then Maria turned at me, and we were like 12 years old. She goes, see, here you are trying to learn all that shit like white people trying to be white and trying to be smart. And she treated you, and you're down here in the gutter just like me. A 12-year-old said that. Which means at 12 years old, the legacy of being in that ghetto, the legacy of racism made her feel that in order for her to be educated, it's only something that white people do. And that because I had questions, that I was wrong. And then you had the teacher who in fact was also, there were a couple of them. You know, one was Latin, Puerto Rican, one was white, and one was black. So it's like, you know, we are the world, right? The three of them were book educated, but they had no idea how the street ran. Mm-hmm. And here we are sitting in this place in Spanish Harlem, where I was raised, and the three of them were book smart. They had no idea. And here's this little girl who's street smart who turned to me and said, and she actually said that you're down here in the gutter, just like me. At 12. And that's one of the legacies of the isms. Mm. The legacy of race, the legacy of sexism as well. Mm. And you know, it's funny, as Natasha was talking, I'm sure you know who Wangechi Mutu is? Yeah. You like her work?
Yeah, no, I love her. She's definitely like, because when I first started making like collages, she was one of the first people I looked at for that, for sure.
Yeah, because I saw yours, I loved it. It's like that went through my head when I was watching. I know I jump around, I can't help it. It's just what I do. But yeah,
we like jumping around. We're here for it.
Guys, we've got to do this in person when the world gets right again with this.
That would be awesome, man. That would be
wine will be drank. Good food will be.
Oh man, yes it will. Yes it will. And actually, after I talk to you guys, I got to do a little bit of things, and then it's like I'm gonna have some.
I'm wondering if at this point anybody in the audience had any questions for any of our panelists that they wanted to share. One thing I was thinking that I thought was really interesting about all your pieces is about kind of flipping that point of view. There's something really interesting for me, and especially now when the world is so polarized, and you've all touched upon it, about just kind of this idea of being able to look at a situation, see the different points of view and the nuances and the way that conversations have to happen, because it doesn't feel like it needs to be a sort of right or wrong, black or white type kind of conversation that we're having. And I think Is there something about, particularly about this year, or particularly about the way that you work, that makes you feel like you need to delve into it? Because you all seem really well read and really well educated, and you kind of look at and try and get as much information as possible before you create your work. So is there something about, how do you approach being able to look at the world view from various different angles and be able to portray that within the pieces that you create?
You know, for me, I'd say that there's something that Dael said that I think was quite prescient, very true to all of the playwrights that I know personally, and certainly all the ones that I've researched about, that actually writing isn't actually about writing, it's about reading, you know, and there's a way to read as a writer in particularly. And I just feel like there is such a long line. And then the way I learned how to be a playwright was with someone called Suzanne Bell, who's literally the person who introduced me to Dael's work. And at the Liverpool Everyman, I was the BBC writing attachment, and for the best part of a year and a half, I'd go in every Thursday, and you know, she'd give me like 6 plays to read. You know, everything from, you know, ancient Greek text to contemporary stuff from every culture, every country. And we would just talk about those plays, you know? We'd talk about them, and we'd think about all the decisions that playwrights have been making, and all the traditions of storytelling that have existed in all kinds of human cultures. And eventually you end up with quite an encyclopedic knowledge of decisions that other human beings have made. And, you know, I'm, you know, to my understanding at least, I'm not sure there is such a thing as an original story anymore. I do think that there's originality in storytelling because people impart their humanity into the stories that they tell. But in terms of the stuff that I think I'm doing at the moment, in terms of the things that I see in my friends' work here, I do think that there's a long line of and it's almost like the way Dael sort of pointed out in terms of how each generation of writer was talking to another generation and wanting to say to that generation, you inspired me. You know, it's like, you know, jealousy levels for real when you're talking about August Wilson like that. I'm just like, wow, okay, right. But what a privilege that must have been to be able to have that conversation. I mean, that's extraordinary. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, he was a very complicated man, but yeah, it was great to. I mean, he had his own demons, as we all do, but it's just like when you sit with him, it's like, I mean, he, you know, to hear him recite Fernhill, to hear him, you know, read, recite James Tyrone talking about, you know, how he was Edmund Kean, you know, saw him and thought, my God, that man is playing Shakespeare better than I did. He had this all in his head. And we're talking about somebody who dropped out of school because he was told that what he was writing, he wasn't smart enough to do it. No, it was, but it's like, but I think we are, you can't be, you know, no matter what you're doing, you know, myself, yourself, Natasha, any of us, you cannot be myopic within your thinking. You can't. How can you? I mean, you would have no art form. And again, this is what happens when people talk about, you know, censorship. I mean, there's a do you have a magazine, you guys there called Harper's Bazaar? Do you have that magazine there?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's, you know, somebody tried to, I can't swear, so I won't do it, tried to give me S because I signed an anti-censorship letter. And I will sign that letter again and again and again. Again, to censor is to create, I mean, we're dealing with it, thank God we got him out of office now, but to censor creates a Trump. You know, lack of knowledge is dangerous because you can't fight. You don't learn. And yes, within that, you're going to come across things you do not like. And when someone says, oh, this part of history, I don't want to hear, that part of history, I do want to hear, all of it is gold. All of it is gold. And you take the dung and you turn it into fertilizer. That's what needs to happen. And you use it. Don't simply, oh, dung was thrown at me. Yeah, get in line. That's what happens, man. But you take that dung and you turn it into fertilizer and you make it work.
Yeah, I think it's it's maybe like DVC Pierre or someone, I can't remember, who says every bit of it is rocket fuel, every bit. Right? That's the thing, isn't it? Like as makers of art, like not one bit of it isn't ours to take.
Right.
Even the dung, which
That's
I feel like is the most visceral thing someone said to me.
It is visceral. It is. It's like, I was talking to somebody, and when I was in London, I was working at this theater, the Arcola, and again, it's not for me to talk about politics. I don't know, but I'm just talking about the legacy of the ism, because you have classism as well. And there was a young actor that was there, and he goes, "Well, I'm determined to stay in, like Hackney, and I'm determined." And I said, "That's cool if that's what you want to do." And I said, "But again, it's see the world, and then if you want to come back to Hackney, whatever." And he goes, "I don't want to be like, say, Gary Oldman and Tim Roth. They sold out." And I said, "I don't know what that means." But then again, this goes back to the ism, and it's like, because they managed to become, you're talking about both of these guys are from Southeast London. They were not posh by any stretch of the imagination, but because they chose to leave and see the world in different ways, they were told that they sold out. And this man was, to a certain degree, because I was asking him, I said, "Listen, Paris is only 2 hours on the train. Have you been there?" And he goes, "No." And I said, "You can see some great stuff in Paris." And it's almost as if his fear of seeing the world has gotten to him, and because he has been made to feel, in order for him to be, a real Cockney, because he kept saying that he was a Cockney, that, and I'm looking at him going, yeah, and it's like, in order for him to be true to like the street, you have to stay there. And that's part of the ism. And I said, well, those guys became wonderful actors. I said, if you feel you can do that here, I said, but you haven't seen enough, you haven't done enough. And I'm saying this to myself. But it came down to what? The legacy and his fear. It's one thing if he went away and came back and he wanted to do that, but more than likely he's not going to do that. It's a rebel without a cause. It's more like rebel without a clue in his case, Yeah.
So I've got a question here from Victoria. It says, and this is for the whole group, what do you think theatre or performance art can achieve in exploring both issues and solutions around race and other isms that other art forms cannot? So why is it your chosen medium? Why have you chosen to use theatre or performance art as the medium to sort of explore both the issues around and the solutions around race and other isms?
Natasha, my sister, you have a run at this one.
Oh, it's weird because I don't really know what I fit into in terms of like theatre, performance art, and I'm still like maybe not comfortable with like any title really, but in terms of like working through things, I'm thinking the body it kind of starts with the body and how that's represented in the space and how that feels and how that feels with an audience. Particularly right now, like seeing things online actually, and just like having that disconnect from like being with other people or being in the same space and having that lighting or that kind of like the atmosphere like that you get when you're in a space and you're with people and you're watching something for the first time. So I think that for me has been something that I've thought about in terms of like how this is a medium that can be used to, I guess, I was speaking about the post-human earlier, but even thinking about the human body and how that connects with other people, I'm just super interested in thinking through that, and hopefully that creates like a connection by using myself within my work, by using my voice and having that sort of like human aspects to it. It creates a connection between other people, and I think that can be a good way to reach people and talk about these important things or talk about complex ideas that not necessarily have answers, but just to be there in a space.
Yeah, I think I agree as well. I think that I often teach at university. I guess it doesn't matter if it's undergrad or postgrad. Is that the one thing I do demand when I watch a stage play is that it's truly a theatrical experience. If I watch a film, I want it to be a truly cinematic experience. And I think that there's something about storytelling that is the pace of it and the level of deep depth it can go into, and that shared experience that you can get. You know, all those aspects of theatricality, I think, are priceless. And you know, I love to. I think I said this to you over email, Natasha. I'm really fascinated about what part 2 and part 3 are going to be about, because I think you said that was part 1 of actually something quite larger. Because in a way, you're in that territory of new media, you know, of new experiences. So it's like if I thought there was an exciting answer that was perhaps unpredictable to the question from, I think it was Victoria, you know, possibly it is the work of a new generation of the Natashas of this world that may come up with something that actually shocks us and finds a way to say something in a way that is very different and somehow connects in a way that, you know, more traditional forms. You know, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but you know, certainly theatre and film I would regard as more traditional forms of storytelling. And the only thing that I would say is that the thing that I think is the death of the theatre is the repackaged article. You know, there's something that you can get out of a history book. There's something that you can get out of a news broadcast. And if a stage play on some basic level isn't giving us something more, isn't showing us some deeper level, you know, what's the point of writing it? You know, I remember the first time I wrote an opera, you know, I felt like the composer managed to communicate something with the music. And it was, you know, like most operas, it's a pattern that repeats. But the composer managed to communicate a sense of sadness, a sense of tragedy, simply by taking that music to such a dark, dark place in the second half of that opera that I think would have been impossible for me to communicate in words alone. I look at that first opera and I sit back and I'm like, I would never choose to write that as a stage play, because you could have the best actor on planet Earth, and I could be at my absolute best, whatever that is, and it would never be more profound than the video that I saw of a man, a father, talking directly to camera about the grief of losing his son during those flash floods in 2009. And yet, the composer, my God, that composer managed to take what was obviously in the libretto, very stripped back words, and produce something that genuinely shocked me to my core. And I expect that of a stage play. You know, I expect that of a film. And the exciting thing, I guess, about Natasha's work is I felt like I was engaging with a medium there and an approach that was something really new to me, you know. So again, I would love to, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but what do you have a sense of what part 2 and part 3 is going to be, or are you still like in that place where you're just sort of thinking about it?
Yeah, I think like, so I'm working on part 2 at the moment, but then I guess kind of everything I've done this year has followed on from it in like a nice way, like in terms of like writing, and I'm moving on to kind of different ways of like working with film and like writing as well. But yeah, it was definitely like in Dreams Out is definitely the very beginning of this like bigger idea that I think could last like quite a while, which is quite exciting as well to have that as like because every time, yeah, like when I've watched it, I'm like, oh no, I'm like, even just in like a year, my knowledge has changed completely on those topics or subjects, or even some of the ideas I was hinting at. So I think that it's quite exciting to have that like kind of possibility. But yeah, definitely they're in the works.
That actually leads quite nicely to a question from Ellen, who's asking, so if live art is starting a conversation, does that feel different with digital audiences versus live audiences? And do you think people are more or less receptive? Does anybody have a feeling as to whether, you know, the kind of creating in these sort of new mediums that incorporate digital feels different for, you know,
Did you guys ever watch the film Moonlight? Did you guys see that film? The first time I've been in a cinema for a long time when I watched that film, sometimes you just get an audience in the right place where not only were people like silent at the end of that film, it was like profound silence, you know, it was like a live experience. I think a lot of times you go to the cinema and the credits roll and people just stand up and they go and they don't really think about it again. So I do think that there is a potential there digital audiences to have, but at the same time, I certainly don't necessarily like watching drama on my own, even if it's in my private space. I would want to watch it with my partner or a friend or something like that. And I think there is something wonderful about sharing a story with somebody. But I think me and Dael were talking about this before, we're quite purist in the sense, especially when it comes to just theatre. There's something that somehow diminishes theatre if it isn't in that space with a live audience.
Big nods from Dael.
But like, what was your experience when you watched Moonlight? I'm curious, because was that like a one-off, the experience that I had with that audience? Or was it like, is that how it was universally with a lot of audiences?
No, I love Moonlight, but we're in a funny time, because we're talking about this hybrid thing. I mean, for me, there's theater and there's film. And there is an art form that has come from this to a certain degree, but it's not the same thing in terms of you having this immediate effect and then, with someone, and you get up and you talk about it and you leave. Yeah, because it's meant to, I think it's meant to be, you have different things that do different things. I love the idea of someone silencing an audience, but we're all together within that silence, if that makes any sense, so that's the thing. But yeah.
That silence changes every night though, right? There's moments where it's your own play and you watch that play maybe 5-6 performances in a row, and that silence that seems to happen in the same place in the play every night changes depending on who's in the room. And I think that's the thing you can't replace.
That's totally it, because it is going to be different every night. It's going to be, so yeah.
So we have one last question from Morvin. If our ability to sense mate together as a society is being eroded and we're becoming increasingly polarized, theatre surely has a role in pulling back and around, and which is more in pulling that back around, that sort of polarization back around, which is more crucial now than ever. Do we as theatre makers need to be clearer, more frank in a way, about describing theatre as a space where that can be? Is the term political theatre useful anymore? Is that?
I'll take the last bit of that. I'm gonna leave the first bit of that to other people. I don't think that so something that comes up in university a lot. You might get a student who comes along and actually in a way, Dael, you referenced this a little bit. I mean, not directly, but there's no such thing as a non-political play. The very act of being a writer is to sort of put a frame around something and make a political decision about what you're going to show the audience and what you're not going to show an audience. In some ways, writing plays, even post-traumatic work, is you create a character, you give that character certain traits, and by the end of that story, you either reward that character by giving them something that they deeply want on some really deep conscious level, or you don't give that person what they want. The very act of that is like playing God. It's political, As in, even if you actively go out and try and say, I don't want to be a political writer, you actively go out. And the thing that I'm sort of thinking about there was when you were sort of saying that even something that's quite frivolous actually is never completely mindless. There's always a politics underneath it. So it's like, certainly I'll have a bite at that, as in, I don't believe there is anything in this world that isn't political in some way, shape or form. But I'm gonna let you guys, by the way, the quality of the questions, do you know? Strong.
Does anybody else want to take a little bit of a bite of that?
No, I second that. I mean, I think if it becomes, for certain people who are issue based, or who are using it definitely as a political form, if one, we'll get it. If one is sincere within what they have to say and they're passionate with what they have to say, but also realize this is still a medium, where, give me room to think about what you said and give me room to agree and or disagree. You just do your work and we'll get it. But yeah, I never give up on theater. There's nothing like the live experience of it. And we're going to get back in the theaters. We are.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely echo those, just like in terms of thinking about I guess like neutral spaces, I don't think that really can exist. And I think everything is tied up in politics, whether small or big or impactful, and especially as Black creators, there's always that political aspect to it, whether that's intended or not.
Can I say as well, I think that theatre makers are super clear and frank about that, and it's theatre programmers and administrators who aren't. And that because the makers I speak to damn well know the potency of what they're doing. It's maybe the marketing team who are struggling to tell people what it is.
Absolutely. I concur with that. I think there's absolutely something in when it's handed over to somebody else and they feel the need to spin something or bring audiences in through something, then it begins to get stripped away. But makers and artists tend to be very clear on the purpose of on what they've created. And
that's why there's often, I think maybe Dael said it earlier, like audiences aren't stupid, you know what I mean? It's all the like conduits in between that get tied up in money and sales that create those pockets of ignorance that was never the point of the art in the first place, to me.
And I think audiences are also braver and more open than people would want them to be. There's always that like I think that people tend to want to err on a safer side, but from what I see is if you open up a conversation, even with the sort of the people who are who get their information from the tabloids or whatever it is, if you open up a conversation, if you open up another chain of thought or another way of thinking, that for the most part people are quite receptive to being put into that space where they feel like they're a little bit uncomfortable or they're learning or something in between. I think audiences are a lot braver and more open than most kind of programmers and marketing team would feel like they could just say what's on offer. So I think there's something in that.
Big provocation industry-wide, I'd say there to end on, which we like to end on an ambitious provocation, don't we? Especially this particular group of people. That's a perfect place to finish. And I just want to say a huge thank you. And I want this to be a dinner party that we film. Like, surely, let's all meet in New York, yeah?
I think surely there has to be wine at some point, and there has to be wine and food at some point.
It has to be. Thank you for having me on this. This is great.
Thank you. I mean, you're going to enjoy the rest of your day. We're winding up here.
True. Our producer Ruth just asked if the panelists can stay on, and we'll wrap up, but otherwise thank you so much, and thank you so much to our attendees and our incredibly high quality questions, as May said, absolutely unreal. Thank you for being with us, and there'll be even more live Q&As as more and more happenings come out, so do keep an eye out for that.
Nice one, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you all for coming.
Lovely.